Happy Thursday, George and Matt. How are
Good
you
morning.
guys doing today?
Oh, good. Thank you very much, Megan. Thanks for asking.
Of course, Matt. How about you?
I'm doing well. Thursday is my second favorite day of the week, so I'm pretty happy.
What is your
Thursday's my
favorite day?
favorite day. Yeah, what's your
What's your
favorite
favorite day, Matt?
Friday, because it's pizza day.
Ah, that's true. Friday is pizza day. Fair
And
enough.
and
Fair enough.
Thursday's the day before pizza day. So
Right.
It actually should, honestly, we should start calling it like Garlic Knots Day or some other thing that would come with pizza to get you started. But that's not really what we're here to talk about today.
no.
So I'm just gonna let Megan take the mic.
Um, thank you, Matt. First of all, before we jump into our stream, as usual, I want to thank regular viewers. Thank you so much for watching. We show up because of you. And anyone who's new, welcome. We are Valiant Technology. We are a managed service provider located in New York, but we have a national reach. And if you want to learn more about us, we have a very large catalog of videos on YouTube, and you can also visit us at thevaliantway.com. Oh, sorry. I'm just like speeding through these, Matt. I want you to
Oh, no, that was perfectly timed. That was like synchronized swimmer level shit. Oh, please.
And also a good way to interact with us truly is just putting comments on the YouTube videos. Or you can also comment on Twitter. Follow us there at The Valiant Way. And we really do like to interact, and we like to see what content you guys want to see, especially when it obviously comes to IT. We are the experts, and go ahead and ask us. We can bring in other members of the team to answer specific questions. Yeah, so please, we see those DMs, so keep up the communication. Now, let's move in to our topic today. As you saw in the title card, it's all about balance, right? And we're talking about the intersection of collaboration and IT compliance. And in my brain, I mean, when George and I have sales calls, because that's really my window in this industry, usually it's people who want our prospects are people looking for a lot more streamlined communication and collaboration with their team, because maybe there's a lot of times they say, I just don't know what's going on. I don't know what's where. I don't know who's talking on what platform, all of that. And then also about increasing compliance standards, which in the last 2 years since the pandemic has increased a lot. And it's actually just, there's no really end in sight for that. So we're kind of talking about, again, the intersection of compliance and collaboration. And George, for me, it reminds me of sort of the CIA triad. It's where confidentiality but accessibility also intersect. Like, you got to be able to work, but you also got to.
Right. It's just, I think a lot of this is that we have to be able to provide the channels of communication to staff.
Yeah.
We have to do it in a way that is safe, effective, and repeatable. There's nothing worse. And we're going to get into this a little bit later in the future in the episode here, just about, the kind of the shadow IT, back channel communication, information kind of leaking out. So I think there's a lot of really great tools that's emerged in the past couple of years, particularly.
George, before we continue, could you please list off those 3 items again?
Which one?
The ones that you just gave. I think that the 4th was missing. I think that being able to use these tools should have some degree of enjoyment to it. It shouldn't be difficult and painful to use. They should be something that you're happy to use to get something done with.
That's true. Yeah. If that's exactly true, Matt.
Like if I'm going into the salt mines, I'm going to have a really sweet pick to work with.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's a salt mine per se, but nevertheless, you do want people to have somewhat of a delightful experience in using the tool, because if you don't enjoy using it, it's like just doing, a lot of times doing IT support work, we tend to use tools that are designed by engineers for engineers, and they're not simple to use. There's a huge learning curve. They're a lot confusing. It's really
they're not intuitive for people outside of the engineering. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And actually, I find myself sometimes when I see tools that are not designed for other engineers, I get really confused, because I'm like, why is there not 400 buttons and 200 submenus and all these pieces here? I get more confused, and it's like, oh, there's a really streamlined interface. You need to do these things to unlock it and use the wizard, and that makes no sense to me. But I don't
Yeah,
think
when I first started working here, all of that was new language for me, and yeah.
So,
but
I think that a lot of this, I think a lot of these idea of building a compliant collaboration methodology and platform for your company is really important. And we can go through some of this stuff here. So, Matt, why don't you kick us off? Because I know you do a lot of research on this. This is something you think about a lot.
Hold on, let's just get Drew on here. The weekly comment from Drew, which is good.
The salt mine in
And honestly, I had the Flintstones in my head at first, and I couldn't remember the word quarry, so that's why we got salt mine.
Better than Spacely Sprockets, though, if you're George Jetson.
Cogswell Cogs and Spacely Sprockets just merge into meta. Now on to segment 2. It's not so much about like methodologies and all this kind of stuff, but I think that just looking at these two items as ones that may not necessarily present conflict, but be a little bit difficult to maintain balance between from a different standpoint. And I think that standpoint can be kicked off with just a very, very basic statement. Good documentation is at the heart of effective compliance efforts. It's something we've talked about a bit since the beginning of the year. Compliance has been on our minds, I think, a little bit more so than normal, at least with respect to the weekly stream that we do. And I think that time after time, everything we talk about does come down to being related to having good documentation. And now that we are largely in hybrid work scenarios all around the world, we're not just talking about ourselves, our customers, colleagues at other similar businesses, so on and so forth. Collaboration platforms have really become a main tool that we work with. And, it's a tool that we work with. And when you think about compliance, you always have to remember that it's not something that an individual or an individual operating unit within a business does. It's something that touches almost every part of an organization. So when you have a compliance need or the need to develop a compliance policies or a system within your organization, and you have a collaboration platform that's going to enable the ingredients to actually come together without physically being in the same location, that's when it really starts to make sense, as the two of them being able to complement each other as opposed to being a balancing act.
Right. Yeah. I think the idea is, you knowing that you're not going to be in this physical same perimeter or same environment, you have to rely on these. We rely very heavily on the collaboration tools, but you also have to acknowledge the fact that things can get out of that environment much easier because you just don't have the control over it you once had. You have to really change the way you interact with it. You have to train your staff differently, and you have to communicate differently. I think there's a lot of pieces of it, and there's a lot of I think some table stakes that are available in different platforms that are super useful for this in terms of being compliant and foster that collaboration.
Absolutely. And I think just for the sake of mentioning it, we use Microsoft 365. It's a platform that we make available to a lot of our customers, and of course there are other ones out there like Google Workplace. But a lot of what we're talking about today is directly reflected within Microsoft 365, but also applies to many other platforms.
Correct. I was going to say that there's analogs and
absolutely.
Valiant as a managed service provider was implemented it on both platforms. We think we try to be a little agnostic, like platform agnostic, more like concept of getting these tools in the right place in the people's hands so they can actually use them.
Yes.
One of the things that is a real problem is that there's so many tools that companies don't adapt them quickly enough or properly. Yeah. And then it becomes just kind of very wasteful. Yeah. But there's things they should be doing. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the tools that are commonly found in these platforms that help make collaborating with your teams a little bit more, I'm going to say more secure. And I know there is a bit of a difference between cybersecurity and compliance are tied together, but let's talk about some of the items that we find in the software that helps us maintain a certain level of compliance when we are working between each other or with ourselves and external partners, third-party customers, whoever those might be. And I think that the number one, if this was an episode of, what was that show with the scoreboard in the background? Survey says multi-factor authentication. We've got 3,500 votes.
Family Feud.
Thank you. Yes, it's like a Family Feud thing. If this would be the high scoring, top of the board one, multi-factor authentication.
It's like it's just
it's the bar.
We should be doing it now.
Everyone has
like
to
having
have
a
it.
password.
Look,
Yeah,
in the 90s, an airbag was a luxury. My 94 Jeep is proof of that. Today, it's a standard. And I think that something like multi-factor authentication goes along that same route. As at one time, it was a great thing to have. Now it's something that you simply need to be able to function properly.
Yeah.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. We're getting
Hi,
support
Tim.
here. Everyone's giving us the answers. Family Feud, and of course, I believe Steve Harvey was the
That's
latest.
a newer version of it. It was Richard Dawson, the original version from the 70s.
And I think what's his name?
Really suits.
The comedian who recently passed, unfortunately, was the host for a while. Louis Anderson.
That's right. I think you're right.
Okay, we go from compliance to Family Feud. I am the best at derailing things.
You are very good at it, man.
Multi-factor authentication really is something that's a standard today. I think it's something that really needs to be a part of the contemporary business lexicon when it comes to technology. And we've talked about it a million times, so we don't have to go into it that far. But something that I would like to talk a little bit about is asset labeling. And when I talk about asset labeling, I'm mostly referring to Microsoft's information protection technologies that they have throughout the ecosystem. A lot of things get pushed around between people. I mean, there's a document that we have for this that gets shared out with 5 or 6 people within Valiant. And if we have a guest like Tim or Drew or someone else join us, they get access to it too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I can only share that information in very specific ways because of how our CIO, I'm guessing it was our CIO, set up some of how SharePoint works and how we have default labels. There are files on the network and entire folders within SharePoint really that simply can't be shared to external resources. And that's because they shouldn't be. And it's not a matter of me wondering in my head whether or not this should be sent. I simply know it shouldn't because I don't have the ability to share it. And a lot of that is achieved through the ability to label your assets. Think about asset labeling as having a report in front of you on your desk with that little sticky note that says for your eyes only or for upper management, whatever it is. It's very similar to that, right?
Exactly. It's the idea that it should be put back in the locked cabinet or never leave the environment. When exactly not for distribution is a term we used to see in the past.
Yes, there we go.
It mitigates user mistakes. I think, like maybe the less the less savvy person is actually unable to share it outside the company.
Correct, and it was actually and that's for internal documents. It's also like if you're working with your clients, many of the people we support may have access to data that their clients would want to be protected or not publicly available or shared on a platform that they didn't know about. It's really one of the things that we see very frequently in our marketing communication space is, where's this stuff all going? How is it, will you protect it the same level of protection that you would for your own data, like in kind?
And that works perfectly. I mean, at the end of the day, compliance is really all about how data's being collected, validated, stored, distributed, and retained. And everything that we're talking about right there is reflecting that basic definition of the term.
Is that Tim actually made a really good point. He's absolutely correct. There's a massive problems with we've just when sometimes when we start working with new customers as they've grown from like startup stage to kind of like a midlife cycle where they start needing an outside managed service provider. The original 365 setup was done by someone with like a credit card in about an hour and a half of time. Yep. And it's evidenced by how it's configured. And not to say that they're incompetent or stupid or whatever. It's just, there's a lot to it. It's like anything else. Like it's really easy to put some drywall up, but it's really hard to put up a house. So it's a very different skill set. There's a lot of in-depth pieces that go into it. And so thanks, Tim. That's a really good point. It's one that we not that we want to beat the dead horse on, but it's important. It's like there's a lot of places, and even when we start working with our other new customers, maybe they had an MSP. There's some best practices are not followed, and it's really common. So again, DIY is great to a point. So
but it's about scaling. It's like look at your environment and know when you need to maybe upgrade it.
when you need to call in the pros. It's like, look, I actually bought myself a deli slicer a number of years ago, and I used it once, and that was all I needed to know, that I could just go to the deli down the street and let them take care of it for me.
Also,
I was trying to do the Cosmo Kramer super thin turkey slice under the door thing, and it did not go well.
Yeah, it's like a table saw. It's like it's really awesome tool. treat it with respect, you know? So,
Okay.
but another piece besides the asset labeling that goes right hand in hand with it is some data asset governance, where you really do want to, you know, when you label it, but keep track of where those labels are going.
Know where it goes.
Right.
Yeah.
And really kind of make it so that it's very clearly defined. I think one of the biggest problems we see all the time, yes, one of the things we see, that's exactly right. You don't, exactly, Tim,
Right.
that's 100% correct. Plumbers are great for plumbing. And, but the data asset governance, once again, you just to go back to that for a second, you really want to be able to understand where everything is going and the asset, and they work hand in hand with the asset labeling.
Well, yeah, you want to be able to have an understanding at a glance of what is where and how it's being protected, like we were talking about asset labeling. And even just planning when you were talking a little bit about the Office 365 misconfigurations. If you don't go into something with a plan, and you should never expect to always go into things with a plan because they may not be expected, who knows how many different ways you're labeling your data? How many ways are you labeling data in ways that are redundant? You know, it's very easy to lose track of how many times you build a specific setting for something to be protected, and you do need to have a proper governance program in place to help you keep track of those items and understand what's going on right now and what needs to change as time goes on. Businesses are dynamic. The needs are going to change. The technologies are going to change. And if you don't have the equivalent of like a scoreboard or something in front of you to understand what's where, you're not going to be able to get from point A to point B.
Exactly. I think the final thing that's really important is putting up barriers to prevent information from leaking out of the environment. One of the things we see a lot is people sending out personal pet peeve of mine, emailing credit cards, either pictures of them or the actual credit card numbers, expiration date, and the zip code and the CCV. It's like that is terrible. And now it's in my mailbox, right?
Yeah.
Or it's in someone here's mailbox.
Yeah.
It's really problematic. So there's a lot of great, fairly simple technologies to put in place to prevent that from happening, where it blasts it back. There's data loss prevention. So it's a piece that we're starting to see more commonly asked for. It's in play. People are looking for it. It's a whole process to get it to get started. There's a bit of training involved. Once again, these tools are great, but people have to know how to use them. And it's great. You're exactly right, Drew. You don't want that to come in. We put that in place because we're really tired of it.
It's the technical equivalent of sticking your fingers in your ears and screaming la 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 la.
Yeah, it's really the DLP piece is really problematic. If it's not implemented, I should say that it's a great technology, and there's some really good ones out there. But yeah, it still shocks me to this day, like people emailing, pictures of driver's licenses. Like, what are you doing? Like driver's license numbers, that sort of thing. And don't get me wrong, it get twitchy because sometimes the strings and numbers look like the same sequences, so you might get a block. But I'd rather take a false positive once in a while than an unfettered access.
Well, yeah, it's in my head this morning, I'm kind of like all over the place with TV. I think I watched a little too much TV last night. It's not something I do that often, but it's kind of like, what was that movie? Mel Gibson, like What a Man Wants, where you could hear everyone's thoughts, and it was just like too much input. There's things
What Women Want.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I was thinking of a Christina Aguilera song, wasn't I? There was something there. I messed
What a girl wants. Okay.
Okay.
Now we're on my subject.
At the end of the day, it's too much info, and it's info you don't want. It's info you don't need. It's info that could be found to be a liability in some cases, and it's not something you're requesting. So keep it away from me. And that's essentially what these technologies allow to have happen.
Right.
To block the noise, if you will.
And if sort of loosely related to that, if we want to move on to segment 3, but I think it's sort of a similar lack of understanding the vulnerability of the or the information you're sharing and the platforms you share it on, what it means to communicate outside of platforms that are used by your business. So I think a really good example.
Out of band communication presents many risks.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to it can be a little bit difficult to prevent technologically because it's based on human behavior. And
Right.
it's something that I guarantee the three of us are guilty of. And so are the people watching today, because it's something that happens. Conversations may start off casually with a coworker, say on Facebook or some other platform, and all of a sudden you're talking about a project or something that needs to get done. And you are putting messages out there that are potentially sensitive. And you have to always keep in mind that the venue in which you speak on is going to have a potential impact on your ability to do your job, provide a proper service. It's like, if you guys haven't seen it, again, another TV reference, there have been commercials for WhatsApp on TV lately where it's like a postal delivery guy going in to people's homes, and he's delivering open messages. And he's like, hey, yeah, your mail's open, whatever. It's the same thing as a text message or an email. I could read that too. It's all technically open. It's not protected. And as much as I get annoyed by the commercial, he's kind of right. The commercial's messaging is right, that there's a lot of methods of communication that really aren't secure. And that's what we're talking about here. Right. You know, Facebook is always going to be the first one that comes to mind just because it's so large. And it's something that, like, you know, I'll be chatting with a coworker, a team member on something, and work comes up. It's like, nope, we go to Teams.
Right.
We continue the conversation there. And when we're done with that, we jump back into another place. And that's important to keep in mind, because it's the kind of thing that can happen so incredibly easily. And, you know, there are business reasons that it can take place. And I think those are the good things that those are the items that we should just really briefly talk about before we begin to wrap up. You know, we've talked about shadow IT in the past. It's a real thing. If a company is providing tools to their team to achieve certain goals, and those tools don't quite meet the needs of the team, they are going to find alternate solutions
to get their job done. Yeah.
Correct. I mean, just invariably, we do it all the time. I mean, just people just go, exactly, Drew, I think, you know, how many times have we fallen back to just using text messaging, which is a terrible methodology if you think about it.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's, you know, that data is protected to some degree. If depending on, well, no, protected that depending on what your industry is, you might be, you might have to be compliant. It's like you're supposed to be privileged. I should say privileged information. But ideally, you want, if it's like you're in FINRA or HIPAA, you won't want to use those methodologies because they're unsecured and not tracked, that sort of thing. And I think that it's really common, and there always has to be a methodology of finding out what people are working on or why they're using tools. I mean, another thing that I think people find is that a lot of people will, in the companies, sign up for free services and put company data out into it. Obviously, we're trying to collaborate. So, you know, how many times if someone goes, oh, yeah, I started using Asana, not to pick on Asana, but I started using Asana, or I started using, Trello, and all of a sudden customer configurations and or data is now out in a free, and I give you air quotes, free cloud service.
Yeah.
That now has, maybe the data in of itself has no, way to be tied back to a specific company or whatever it is. But, clients don't really want their data out there in that method. I think as time goes on, we're going to see more and more kind of questioning of this. And we see it all the time when we start with new customers. So,
and sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, with all that, like, what can we do then to to sort of mitigate that risk? And
before we get into prevention, let's talk about one other thing, because that we were just talking about shadow IT, which is something that happens because of a lack of access to tools that may be adequate for doing the work. But there's also kind of like the exact opposite end of that spectrum where you have cloud sprawl. And I was hoping to get George to give us a good definition of cloud sprawl. That's
sure.
Important.
I mean, cloud sprawl is the internal answer, quote unquote, to the shadow IT, where different segments of the business officially will allow you to start doing, nothing more dangerous than a man with a credit card or a person with a credit card. And they'll say, oh, we're a marketing team, so we use this product. And then you say, well, we need to do this for this project here. So you start paying for a project here. We need Dropbox as a client requires us to use it. And then you start adding in pieces like, okay, we need to use this tool for a signature tool, whatever it is. And next thing you know, you only have 3 tools doing the same thing in the same enterprise, where different teams use it differently. When they can all be consolidated, it can be verified, it could be managed. And I think that that's a really huge just challenge, and one that there's no easy answer for, like most complex problems. It needs like a time, money, effort.
Everything needs a multi-pronged approach here.
Yeah, and cloud sprawl is way more dangerous. Not way more dangerous. It's like
it's equally
place after
dangerous,
Shadow.
but it's being enabled internally by leadership, allowing for these services to come about, be used, and be forgotten. And that's really the problem. It's being generated in a different place. The money being used for it to happen is coming probably from a different place as well in ways. So it's a very similar problem, starting from different like ends of the spectrum of software.
And I think that it's not a measure that the people doing it are bad. They want to solve a problem. They got to get something done. Unfortunately, a lot of times IT or MSPs are not necessarily leading because it's by nature we have to really kind of understand what we're working on. So we're not always like at the bleeding edge, rightly so. You don't want to be the bleeding edge sometimes at these things because you can't secure it, you can't manage it, you haven't trained on it.
You're being a guinea pig at that point if you're going to always be on the bleeding edge. But look, we've got these two potential problems that could lead to these these issues that we're talking about. But as Megan was starting to get into, there are things that could be done to help minimize some of these risks.
And to a cabin in the woods and don't have any internet access.
Exactly.
Well, hold on a second. You can have dial-up. We'll leave it at dial-up. You need some connectivity. But I think IT policies, as honestly dry and as difficult as they can be to put together, really can benefit an organization, especially when they're written in human language. They shouldn't look like an insurance form. It should just be like, these are the things that are okay. These things are not okay. Here's why they're not okay, and the risks that they present to
we work a lot on that. That's one of our, I spend a lot of time with customers working on this and making sure that it actually is something they can enforce. As you've probably heard me say 1,000 times, I feel like I'm sick of saying it myself. It's like there's nothing worse than a policy that you're not enforcing.
There's nothing easier to ignore than a policy that doesn't make sense to the average person.
Right. Correct. Well, the thing is, you can't if people don't understand why they're doing something, they're just not going to do it. It's just human nature.
So make their job harder. If they perceive it as making their job harder, they won't do it. Yeah.
So policies are critical, and I think that policies are most impactful when they're integrated into regular training for your staff, particularly around things like cybersecurity awareness, and that's something that has to happen on a regular basis. It's never a one and done situation.
I think that's also the training road. Understand how to use the tools. Actually, one thing we found a lot is people say, "Oh, we need Slack." It's like, well, you have a free version of Teams that's included in your Microsoft 365 or Google G-Chat, and they're really not using some of the unique functionality of Slack, from what I could tell. Since you start speaking to them, Slack does have some really great, unique tools.
It does.
It's a great product.
But if you're working in an Office 3, I'm sorry, I got to stop that. It's a Microsoft 365. Let's get some time. Microsoft 365 environment to begin with. It's going to be integrated into most likely almost every tool that you're using. And I'll just be very, very, very honest here. It might not be as hip as Slack, but it's going to get the job done. And just working with it for a little while can really, really open up one's eyes to the capabilities that it has and the potential it has for a business.
And I think the other piece that's really important is literally have a feedback mechanism so that people can say, hey, this is not working for us.
And listen,
we get that quite a bit. I mean, internally, we try. I mean, people will say, hey, this is not working. And usually at times we say, okay, that's not working. This is why we're using it though. What can we do to make it work? Or vice versa, or maybe we'll drop it because
we'll just use me as an example. We have our professional services automation system, and being that a lot of the majority of the work I do is in a more creative realm and not really based on critical time periods to get things done in as a support call or a project would be. We had a long talk, and it was just the system is great for service usage, but when it comes to my work, it almost kind of kills creativity because it puts a focus on timeliness. And of course, timeliness is important. I get paid to get things done in a certain amount of time, but having that kind of critical, how many seconds is it taking to get this thing done is just not something that applies to the type of work that I do. We had the conversation about it, and it was, there's an understanding. And if I slip up, I may end up in Autotask, our system again, and that's totally fine. But there are times where you have to have these conversations, and they should be open about what works, what doesn't, and it's not company wide. It should be limited to operating units and individuals to understand what it is that they have to do and how this software either have a positive or a negative impact on their ability to do so.
Right.
And it really is. And I think that those are the kinds of dialogues that have to be very open. They can't have any kind of attachment of worry of repercussion or response, because they need to be very open and honest, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure everyone's able to work securely and in a way that's productive for the sake of reaching goals, because when a business can do that, everyone that's there typically wins.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So looking at we mentioned training, right, as well with staff, and yeah. So that's also very key. And then I just want to, before we end today, I want to do the final word from, George, our president, and I'd say, our expert, in the field. So I'll say it. You don't have to say it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Megan. I think a lot is to sum it up until something more cohesive is, hey, look at the tools you have, really kind of start expanding on utilization of them, deploy them well, work with someone to deploy them. They do take some time and training and effort to get there, but once they're in place, it should be very simple and fairly effortless for your team to get a really high level of protection. It all starts with written policies. Put those written policies together and then kind of act upon them from there. And I think in the end, you'll get a much better compliance and collaboration environment for your staff to work in. So I think that's it. And, balance it out between the pain of doing the security versus the pain of not doing it. And I think the pain of not doing it has a way higher downside in the long haul.
Monetarily, reputation-wise, all that.
All that. I mean, and also just, I think that the effort to put the structure in place could fundamentally streamline your business operations. That's the other piece of it, is that you have it documented and you have a methodology, and it's important, especially as a company matures. Really critical.
Hey, right. keep stalling. I'm trying to load an image.
Sorry. I didn't know you were stalling. I didn't know I was supposed to stall.
I was gonna, that's basically everything we had today. But we also have next week's stream already assembled and ready to go. So I figured we would just quickly preview that and talk about what we're going to do for the next 2 weeks before we call it a day. So next week we're going to be doing Microsoft SharePoint Demystified. It's interesting because I think that throughout my career, SharePoint's existed. It came out a little while before I started in the workplace, and I've had some early experiences, a gap of time not going near it, and then really jumping back into it pretty heavily here at Valiant with a lot of the stuff that we do. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about where SharePoint came from, really explain what it is and the capabilities it has, and talk about some of the basic areas that can be confusing if you just jump into it, especially when you're trying to plan. And then the week after that, what is that, I guess March 10th, we're going to set up a new SharePoint site live as a demo. And I think that'll be fun, and probably wrap up a little bit of this collaboration type block that we've been working on and move on to something else that's going on. We're not sure what that is yet, because I love doing things a little bit more at the last moment these days. A little bit, you know what? A little bit less of a plan sometimes makes for better content. So that's the way we're rolling right now. And if anyone's got anything else to add, now's the time before I hit that little outro button.
Like and subscribe, please, and comment, and just let us know if you have anything you want to see specifically. We love
Oh, absolutely. For the 310 episode, if there's anything in SharePoint that you'd like to see, we'll see if we can add that in. And also, I do want to thank everyone that's been watching, because a lot of what we're talking about right now is directly related to the messages that we've been receiving and questions, and they've been fantastic. Yeah. And I hope that we're answering them in a way that's not only helpful, but helps you take action with the information that we've provided. And I'll just throw it in there because it's good. If you have questions, or if you're looking for services along the lines of what we're talking about, just visit us at thevaliantway.com and reach out, and one of us will get in touch with you.
Yep.
So with all that said, I hope everyone has a really fantastic Thursday, gets ready for Friday, pizza day, the best day of the week. And that's it. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Great night.
Good to see you again.
Good day.
Have a good one.